And we're live, back with another one. Thank you for joining me here on the weekly Boxing Squared live stream, Friday night, New Zealand time, 9:30 p.m. And that might have actually caught a few of you out this week because daylight saving has just finished in New Zealand, so the clocks have changed, and now it's sort of throwing things out wherever you were by about an hour, unless you were already in New Zealand. Otherwise, it's the same time. But so this week, in this week's live stream, a number of topics that I did want to touch on. So the first of which we'll get to in a moment, is Deontay Wilder, his Hall of Fame comments. A hot topic this week as well is Derek Chisora, Joseph Parker, the fight is off. Joseph Spider-Man Parker is out. Suspected spider bite, has put paid for that. He's been unable to train. We'll talk about that. Obviously now it's swirling around. Who is the replacement going to be? And that's a harder question than it otherwise may have been, because obviously it's a pay-per-view event. The one fight of note this weekend in the heavyweight division is Jermaine Franklin versus Pavel Sauer, so we'll talk about that briefly. I'll quickly sort of touch on Evander Holyfield making a comeback, but obviously it's just for an exhibition. But more broadly, that topic of older fighters coming back, that is sort of starting to bubble up as a talking point. And the WBO president has been taking shots at the WBA, and I guess, a lot of us do this, but often when another sanctioning body is doing that, it's generally not the done thing, but it is happening. And of course, a sprinkle throughout, there will be some questions from my Patreon patrons, and I'm just getting back to the chat here. So hello and welcome to everyone who's in here. So I think we've got 11 people already in the chat here. Hello to everyone there. It's moving quite quickly, so I don't want to just sort of dwell on that. But we'll start with the Hall of Fame comments by Deontay Wilder in an interview this week, saying that he is already Hall of Fame. If he retired tomorrow, he would be in the Hall of Fame. And that certainly has got a number of people talking about this topic, and I didn't manage to get round to do a specific video on it, but it's one of these topics I thought it's a good back and forth topic for this sort of forum, especially with the chat here. And it really is, it's going to be quite a divisive topic, because I think right now, for me, just this my personal opinion, is he's kind of almost there, but it's, it really is one of those sort of more touch and go, because you can make a case, you go, okay, well, he's been the WBC champion for 4 years and change, and 9 defenses so far, and obviously he won the title too, so he's had a number of successful championship fights. But then it becomes that age-old question: who was he fighting? What was the opponents in terms of their record? Was it a worthy win to really contribute to a Hall of Fame career? And at the moment, Deontay Wilder is in one of those sort of positions, I believe, where he's had a number of championship fights that people didn't necessarily want or need to see, but they were okay, just okay. And obviously since 2018, he's really been stepping up his competition. So he's in a phase now where he's trying to put that exclamation point on his career. The likes of Luis Ortiz, Tyson Fury. Luis Ortiz again, although I don't believe we needed to see that rematch, and we will potentially get to see that rematch with Tyson Fury at the start of 2020. But he does need a couple of those bigger and better wins to really flesh out the career. So you can make an argument right now that it might be touch and go. And I'm sure there will be some fans who believe, actually, he's probably done enough already. And I guess it depends on, the different years. Some of the people who've got into the Hall of Fame, and there is often some debatable cases. But it is a year-by-year thing, and it's people have opinions on this topic. But let me know your thoughts on whether Deontay Wilder is Hall of Fame right now. I think he's kind of on the brink of getting there, but, another couple of wins probably secures him in there, without too many arguments. So we'll just go to the chat now. So Scott70 says Franklin to get the stoppage. He is facing Pavel Sauer this weekend. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but this is a case for me. I think he needs a good stoppage. He needs a good win against Pavel Sauer, because Franklin hasn't exactly sparkled so far in some of his step-up fights, his televised step-up fights, and it hasn't necessarily been against great opposition. So Arjun says Deontay Wilder can get a job lacing Tyson Fury's shoelaces. Rightio. Okay. I mean, I guess you could, if you were to run parallels within the heavyweight division, is there anyone else right now, if they all retired tomorrow, would anyone be in the Hall of Fame? Because you can make a case that even Fury's record is, a little bit thin. You have the Vladimir Klitschko win, you have a draw with Wilder, a couple of wins over Derek Chisora, a win over Christian Hammer, and not much else. And even then, the Chisora and Hammer wins, how much weight do you give those? So Angus says, I think he might get in there. I think if he retired tomorrow, it might, I think he probably would. But I think in terms of when you look at the resume, maybe it does need a bit more, but that's the sort of stuff he's doing anyway. Thelimus says, Wilder has a better claim to a Hall of Fame than any heavyweight. Hashtag facts. You always know it's a statement when someone says hashtag facts at the end. I mean, I think compared to the other heavyweights running around, he's got a number of decent level wins, but you could also argue that someone like Alexander Povetkin, a number of his wins are pretty much on a par with Deontay Wilder. So is Alexander Povetkin a Hall of Famer or potential Hall of Famer? Because he's got a pretty deep resume too. And if you look at other heavyweights, I mean, we just talked about Fury, even Anthony Joshua's got a claim potentially to, is his career, is he done enough, or does he need to do more? I mean, I think you can make cases for and against probably for about 4 or 5 different guys. Just moving on here in the chat. Okay, people are talking about the Triple G fight, which we'll come to a little bit later on because I do have a Patreon question on that, but I won't weigh in at the moment. But Unga says, no current heavyweight a Hall of Fame. And that's, that's a good sort of statement to make, because then that gets you asking the questions. Well, what are the criteria? And often some years it comes down to the sort of class that you're sort of potentially weighed in with too. So Reality's Voice says, held single belt, hidden it from serious contenders for years, Hall of Fame is the most proven of the elite, an unproven old man and an out of form alcoholic. Hall of Farce. Well, I think we know that Reality's Voice does not support Deontay Wilder's claim there, that he would get into the Hall of Fame. So Up the R says, if Wilder gets it, it will be undeserved. And I think at the moment, if he was to retire tomorrow, there would be a number of people who are in that camp. But this is the thing. I think we know that Deontay Wilder's not retiring tomorrow. He is building his piece of legacy, and he's trying to, be considered among the great heavyweights. But he's got more to do. I mean, all these guys do if they want to go down in history as one of the greatest heavyweights. So just going down the chat here. JP says they didn't have 9 title defences. And that's one of the things that is in Wilder's favour. One of the more stronger points is the sheer number of title defences that he's made. But if you do pick apart some of the opposition, maybe some of those fights shouldn't have happened. There should have been some tougher, meat on the resume. But those fights weren't total jokes or anything like that. I mean, you have the likes of Johan Dorper, Eric Molina, Chris Arreola, obviously some others, Gerald Washington, they're just okay. They're okay. So PED says, shout out from Scotland, bro. Hello to you, Ped. Angus says, Tyson Fury surely a Hall of Fame contender because of Vladimir upset. Well, I mean, do we say the same thing of Buster Douglas? I mean, do we say the same thing of other heavyweights that get big upsets? Because one upset win doesn't make a career. Obviously, you can get a lot of mileage out of it, and a lot of people do, but I mean, Tyson Fury also has a lot more to do along with a lot of these other heavyweights. So Unga says, if Gatti can get in the Hall of Fame, anyone can. And that's the thing. I've seen that argument used a lot this week, and specifically people have referenced Arturo Gatti. And I guess that's the thing in different years and the breadth of a career and how it's weighted, because I think we all have different opinions about different fighters, but yeah, he was in a lot of wars and a lot of really sort of high-profile fights, a lot of very good watching sort of fights, and you could maybe make a claim or an argument, did that actually influence him getting into the Hall of Fame? But I guess Unga does raise a good point, that when someone who is a long-reigning champion like Deontay Wilder If Gatti is getting into the Hall of Fame, should someone like Deontay Wilder be a lock? And that's a good point, a valid point in an argument to make. Okay, I'll just go down the chat a little bit, then get to my next topic. So Ruiz versus Parker 2, who wins? I might leave that for another day. I've got a number of other things to get to, Rodney, but Wilder will get in as most voters are Americans, says Unger. Yeah, probably true. The next one, so Blue Collar Sports TV, aka Del Boy, hello to you too. Great channel, and as he says, smash that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed, do subscribe to Blue Collar Sports TV. Top 3 heavyweights right now who you think could beat Tyson Fury. Well, I think after that last fight, there'd be a number of heavyweights who would certainly fancy their chances. I mean, I think Deontay Wilder's got a really good shot of beating Tyson Fury in the rematch. And that not just because Tyson Fury seemingly struggled to some degree in the fight with Otto Warren, but more so because Wilder's proven in the first fight he can catch Fury. Caught him twice in that one, and obviously with Fury getting hurt in the 12th round against Warren, hurt in the 12th round against Wilder, it does make me wonder about Tyson Fury. Can he stay, switched on for the full 12 rounds? Obviously, that sort of staying mentally dialed in for the full 12 and staying on point, it's quite tough, and Fury has sort of let his guard down a couple of times and got clipped. So, I'm wondering, is that something, can he go 12 rounds without getting caught against Deontay Wilder? But there are other heavyweights out there. I don't think Tyson Fury is invincible. I don't think he's unhittable, as some people seemingly claim, and not just because of the Otto Warren fight, but I'm not convinced his reflexes and some of those other things are as sharp as they once were. He's still obviously a class act and one of the best heavyweights in the world. He is going to be a stylistic nightmare for a lot of fighters. So Angus says, they're talking about Parker and Ruiz. Right Hook Boxing, BS Livestream, love it. Hope you're saying Boxing Squared and not the other BS. Right Hook Boxing, if you haven't subscribed to his channel, great channel. And he has got a couple of Patreon questions in. Actually, I'll go to my Patreon page, and what I might do, I'll just see if I can drop something in the chat. Apparently I can't for whatever reason. I was going to put my Patreon link if anyone wanted to check it out. That's weekly videos on a topical issue, and that's from starting at $1 per month. So 4 videos at least every month for $1. But and one of the other things that you can get is you can toss some questions in for the live stream every week. So True 2022, his question is, would you support a cruiserweight limit of 215 pounds and heavyweight limit of 265 pounds? And that's a really interesting question. A really interesting question. Because I think you can make a case that, as things have changed, people have changed too. I mean, 400 years ago, people were only about 5 foot tall. So, and even in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I think we've seen humans are much bigger than they were. I mean, you see stats for different professional athletes, etc. And, 10, or maybe not 10, but say 20, 30, 40 years ago, they were much lighter, they were much smaller on average, and things are advancing and sports science is progressing as well. And that cruiserweight limit, 200 pounds, I have sort of thought about that before. Is that something that should be increased? And so True 2022 did have a heavyweight limit of 265, but I'm not so sure that I would be in favour of capping it. But I think in terms of, could the cruiserweight limit move? Could the light heavyweight limit move? I mean, you could make some adjustments, and I think a cruiserweight limit of 220 pounds and under, that might make some sense. That could actually, and how many heavyweights are running around under the limit? Not a lot. I mean, sure, there's the odd guy, small heavyweight, and occasionally Deontay Wilder's dipped under as well. But in general, most heavyweights do tend to be over 220 pounds, and that might be a good limit, or sort of, for cruiserweight, for example. But in terms of capping it out, yeah, I'm not so sure. I'll just get back to the chat here. Am I watching the UFC card tomorrow? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'll probably give that a look. So Blue Collar Sports TV, who do you think Arslanbek Makhmudov should fight next? It's a good question, because obviously he was looking to have he's had a couple of good fights this year, like that fight with Jonathan Rice. That was a fight that he needed, and I like those sorts of, guys that come to fight. They've got some ambition, and if you're not on your game, or if you're not good enough, they're going to upset you. So I want more guys like that for a guy like Arslanbek Makhmudov. But some of those are in short supply, because it sort of seems to be you've got a whole host of journeymen who just want to sort of fall over, and they'll give it a go for a few rounds, but it really is about survival, and then they'll eventually take something half cuffing and they'll drop to the canvas and really sort of act it out until they're counted out. But even at the sort of higher level, I'm a bit suspect of Alexander Dimitrenko, some of his most recent performances, but I guess a guy like, and we just saw F.A. Jagba and Tony Yoka, they just had a fight with Mikhail Wallish. Maybe they should be looking to give him a phone call, because he's obviously selling his record right now. He's got 3 losses now, 20 wins, and he really is being fed to prospects. So, and it gives us a bit of a barometer too. And I think that Makhmudov probably stops Wallish in the first round. But who else? He's at that phase at the moment. He's 9-0. He needs a few more tough challenges, and is he going to get them? Because he's a very heavy-handed, the right hand, the right uppercut. Some of those shots really do knock people for 6. And we've seen earlier this year, a couple of the fights that he's had, the power has been too much for his opposition. So it's a tough kind of, because you can't keep rolling out a guy like Kevin Johnson, and he's a pretty comparatively quite expensive to get, because he does offer certain things, and obviously, but there's also, I think there's a law of diminishing returns with Kevin Johnson now, because he is just turning up. He's very negative. He's not really coming to fight. He's coming to survive, and I'm not sure that his lack of ambition now, and he doesn't really do too much, if that's actually good for some of these prospects who are trying to look good. I think we saw against Daniel Dubois, a lot of people went pretty sour on Dubois pretty fast, but it was a good test for Daniel Dubois, and it sort of exposed in that fight to some extent his lack of punch variation. And we've seen since then Dubois has been working pretty hard. But there's some tough, durable guys around, but yeah, there is going to come a point where you want to see him in a much better fight, but it's kind of all TBC. And if he continues to fight up in Canada, they've got on those cards generally at casinos, via you can catch it on punchinggrace.com. I don't know, it feels like some of the money that they might be putting up for some of those fighters is not great, and how deep are their pockets, because some of that will dictate who they're also going to get. So it's it's a pretty messy equation. Anyway, I'll get back to the chat here. When is Big Baby coming back? Well, that's a good question. He is apparently, from what he keeps saying, he was doing his countdown over the course of a number of weeks, and sort of, making light of the 6 months that he was out of the WBA ranking. His promoter has talked about a warm-up fight for October, but, this was a number of weeks now, so maybe it will end up being November. But where are they actually going to put him? He's not sort of tied up with anyone in terms of a big promoter right now. He's co-promoted by Dimitri Salita, who is, I would note, has been taking court action against Jarrell Miller, and also he's co-promoted by Greg Cohen. I don't think they're going to rush him into anything decent for a little while, unless the opportunity is there for big money, because I think clearly they're going to milk what they were, the same sort of formula that they were doing before. If he does manage to get back on board with an Eddie Hearn or a Top Rank or even PBC, I think they will look to milk a couple of fights and then set him up for something bigger. The Alphabets have been talking about introducing super heavyweight for years, 235 pounds plus. I'm just sort of thinking about that on the spot. If it ended up being 200 to 235 and then 235 plus, it's kind of like the Olympics. So it ends up feeling, the heavyweight and super heavyweight, to me at least, a little bit diluted. I mean, sure, you can make the argument that obviously it's like every 7 pounds under, from, what is it, about 140 upwards to about 175, and there's a whole lot of, maybe, do we need all that? But yet, I don't know, I think I would just rather see one heavyweight division. I mean, it may be 220, maybe 230 is the sort of, the up and above that you have to be in heavyweight. I don't know. So just catch up to the chat here. So where is White's B sample? That's a good question. If in fact they even tested it, which from what we hear, perhaps they didn't, because they relied on the A sample. But Eddie Hearn has been talking about, perhaps UCAD will come out with something this month. They've been pushing them to do something. We will have to see. So Miroslav says Makhmedov versus Dubois. Why not? I think that's a case that if that happens, that's probably going to be a significant fight in 2 or 3 years' time. It's probably not quite yet. But then again, I mean, Makhmedov, what is he? Is he? I think he's 32. I'm not so sure he's got too much time to waste. He has to be taking some step-ups pretty shortly. Double A Boxing and Blunts, Joyce and Yoka and FA still are ring star fighters. Joyce is still promoted by them, or co-promoted by them, so that's a co-promotional arrangement, as I understand it. Yoka is definitely ring star, and FA, he's still with Richard Schaefer as well. The Joyce one I'm a little bit iffy on. I can't remember if that was an out and right shift to Frank Warren or if that's a co-promotional deal. I'd have to go back and have a look, but yeah, the others definitely are. I actually think, someone left a comment the other day in relation to Tony Yoka, sort of the post-fight review, sort of the comments that I was making, that he's actually quite hated in France at the moment, and he's considered arrogant for having sort of big ambitions and that sort of stuff, and it sort of surprised me. Some of and people are criticizing his opposition, and it sort of surprised me because obviously at this point in his career, what is he? Yoka's 7-0 now. He just beat Mikhail Walsh, who, for a guy that's got 7 fights under his belt, that's a good name to have on your resume for this point in his career. I mean, Walsh just fought Hammer just a couple of fights ago, and he obviously just sparked out Dimitrenko a couple of fights ago. I mean, you can make parallels to other fighters who fought those guys. I mean, like Parker fought Dimitrenko, what was it, in about a 16th or 17th fight? So, Tony Yoka is not doing, terrible at all. I think he's got one of the best resumes for a prospect running around right now. I mean, he fought Rice, what was his second fight? And Rice is a really good sort of, I don't want to say he's a journeyman, but he's a good gatekeeper. So I think Yoka's opposition has been pretty good. I was sort of surprised to hear that he's not being viewed in a favourable light by a lot of people at the moment who are criticising his career in terms of opposition, that sort of stuff. But my response was, he obviously needs a bit more push from Ringstar, because Ringstar should be painting the narrative in France for Tony Yoka that this guy is going through guys that others aren't facing for till much down the line in their career. I mean, I made the parallel to Joseph Parker, who, when he was on the come-up, his promoters, Duco, did a really successful job in New Zealand building this guy up, and Higgins was a perfect hype man for Joseph Parker. And, they had Parker on pay-per-view after about half a dozen fights or so. And David Higgins, along with the wider promotional team, which included Craig Stanaway, did a really successful job of pushing Parker at the public, and some of these fights that he was in, and making them out as if they were credible opposition, where most of the time it was Joseph Parker versus journeyman opposition. I mean, you think Joseph Parker fought Jason Bergman in Samoa on a pay-per-view, and that's crazy. It really is. So and there's some other guys there. I mean, Daniel Martz and Joseph Parker, that was a pay-per-view. There's a lot of names that were pay-per-view that you just, if you sort of now, you sort of consider it and go, wow, that's pretty cringeworthy. But they did a good job of sucking the New Zealand public in to support Parker's journey. And something like that needs to be done for Tony Yoka. And I don't see a lot of promotion of Yoka. So just going down the chat here, and we will get to a few other topics, a few other Patreon questions. Chisora versus Big Baby Miller. I like that fight, but Miller and his team, they're not signing up to that, especially after a 6-month layoff. Even though Miller might talk that up, I mean, I just can't see it. They're going to roll him into some sort of tune-up and sort of see where the chips may sort of fall with Miller. They want to line him up to some sort of promotional deal. I mean, he was on a pretty good wicket before with DAZN, making easy money fighting the likes of Bogdan Dinu and Thomas Adamek for big paydays. And then obviously he got an opportunity to fight Anthony Joshua, and we're hearing from Eddie Hearn that Joshua would still like to fight Big Baby Miller. Obviously, some of what happened, and maybe Joshua feels that Miller is partly responsible for his loss, obviously being the cause of a short replacement and Andy Ruiz Jr. coming into the frame. So Paul Barrett says, okay, I'm not sure what that was in relation to. Who we all think Chisora faces October 26th. My bet is Deweko. And that was the next subject on my list, so thank you there, Adam Fahey. So Joseph Spider-Man Parker had to pull out this week because bitten by a spider, apparently, in Las Vegas in his training camp. We don't know all the circumstances around that. It would be good to get a little bit more detail because obviously some of it, I mean, someone made a point in one of the comments saying it would have almost, I think it was Marla, saying that it would have been almost better not to have gone into the story around the spider bite without producing a bit more proof or evidence, or rather than sort of the vague details that came out, because obviously Parker's been the subject of a number of jokes and skepticism, and if people want to see, well, where's the bite mark? If it was a spider, what was it? Where was the evidence of the bite? Yada yada yada, all that sort of stuff. But so bad luck for us as fans, and for Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora, because that was propping up the card. And as I've spoken about this week, Eddie Hearn's in a bit of a predicament, because if this was just, say, a normal Sky Sports fight night, for example, you could roll in a complete journeyman with Derek Chisora and just write it off to bad luck, and obviously, the ratings might take a bit of a hit. But for this, with it being a pay-per-view event, it being the co-main event, and arguably the fight that more fans would want to see than the main event, which was the Regis Prograis and Josh Taylor World Boxing Super Series final, you can make a case that this is almost a mortal blow for the card, because when you look at the rest of the card, yeah, it looks okay, but you've got Lawrence Okoli, who people are down on at the moment. They're not going to buy the pay-per-view for him. Maybe his family will, and about 5 others, but there's a couple of fights that are okay, but once you take out that Chisora and Parker fight, it certainly does look a little bit weaker, not because the main event isn't a good fight, but it doesn't have mass casual appeal. And that's why they cobbled these two fights together at the top of the bill, to help bang it into something that you could get some good views. And obviously taking that off there because Parker's out through his spider bite, it's a precarious situation, because literally you can sort of say maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, will be on the line and potentially lost through the change of opponents. So it's got to be someone good. So that was obviously a bit of a roundabout and circuitous route to basically saying they need to get a good opponent for Derek Chisora. Those names that have been thrown out by Eddie Hearn, and that, there's 6 names in the Sky Sports story, and there has been the mention of David Price, cursory mention of Filip Hrgovic. But I mean, some of this is just sort of, names throwing out, hoping something's going to stick, because Manuel Cha was never seriously in the conversation, and he's already ruled it out now. Otto Wallen's people are saying that he is going to be taking a break for the rest of the year. So whether calls have really gone out there, or it's just a case of let's throw out half a dozen names, we've really got 2 in mind. I mean, I think you need to look at this and go, who is the most viable of those names? And Michael Hunter, but if they were having plans of having him on the Joshua card, it comes down to a conversation about, well, how much money are you going to pay him? Because that could be a fight that could help save the card. And I know some people have been sort of saying, well, you get Hunter on there, and it's not doing Chisora any favours in terms of, maybe this is not a good matchup for him. But I'm not sure that Eddie Hearn's going to be thinking about that. He'll be thinking about the dollars and cents of the money that they're going to be losing. So if they can get someone like a Hunter, I think that's a pretty good fight. And I'd pick Hunter to win that one. But, we'll have to see. Who do you think is, a potential option? And please don't say Daniel Dubois, because obviously, Frank Warren's not going to be feeding his star blue chip prospect to help save a Matchroom pay-per-view. I've seen a number of people saying Dubois should step in, and it's, come on. It's just not going to happen. What happened to the fight between Usyk and Takam, says Maya? Well, that got cancelled or postponed back in May because Usyk pulled a muscle in his bicep, in his right bicep, so that was off. There was talk that it was going to be held over and he would still be the opponent, but he ended up signing with Star Boxing, and now he's co-promoted by Star Boxing and now ESPN on Top Rank. New phone, who dis? Joyce versus Price. Well, I guess in terms of Price and anyone who's with MTK, what are they doing at the moment in terms of, are they working with both the promoters? Because if MTK is open to working with Frank Warren, as they have in the past, well, you could make that fight. A lot of these things at the moment in the heavyweight division are coming down to promotional issues, which side of the street that you're on. So Raz says Price needs to stay at domestic level. He isn't really a world-class fighter. He might think that he's above domestic level. I mean, he has been the Commonwealth champ before, so that would indicate that he's above domestic level. But, Price he's looking for paydays. And he believes after this card in November in Liverpool that he is going to get something big next year. And a lot of people have sort of said, throw him in with Derek Chisora. I think Derek Chisora would probably take that one. I think the pressure would get to David Price. I mean, Dave Allen just doesn't have enough tools in the toolbox to trouble someone like Price. But I think Derek Chisora, with the aggression and what he'd be looking to do, is a step up, certainly, from Dave Allen. And I think he'd give Price more problems. And you might see a return to the old David Price gassing in half a dozen rounds and then starting to wilt and fold over like a cheap deck chair. And he's probably not going to be wanting to mess his money up if he believes after November 23rd card he's got a good fight in 2020. So I just don't know at 3 weeks' notice if he's going to step in there, unless it's a really big payday. And someone says, why you all want to get Price killed? Price's wife probably doesn't want him taking too many unnecessary steps as well. So Unga says Takam chose to fight Craig Lewis instead. Yeah, that wasn't a great fight either. I don't know how much Takam's really got left in the tank. I mean, you might be able to say in a fight or two, he might be the ideal sort of guy, as Del Boy was asking before, who could he fight? I think someone like a Carlos Takam with ambition and durability, that'd be a good opponent, but could they afford him? And that probably comes down to the promotional backing, and you might be able to make a case that maybe they don't. And Del Boy does say here, part of us still wants to see David Price in with another puncher, David Price versus Makhmudov. Yeah, that probably would get him killed. Price versus Usyk, maybe, says Raz. Well, I think it's hard to say. I mean, we're going to find out a lot about Alexander Usyk at heavyweight on October the 12th, but we're also going to find out a lot about Tyrone Spong, because he's done nothing at heavyweight so far in the professional game. It's a pretty padded record for Spong. And I just saw on my screen, I just had a frame drop out or something. So if it does get a little bit patchy, it may be my internet. I'm not too sure. So apologies in advance anyway. Do you think the injury to Parker is legit? Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt it. I mean, he's obviously been unable to train. He would have gone through with the fight otherwise. I don't buy this whole narrative that he's scared of Derek Chisora, because I believe he was going to comfortably outpoint Derek Chisora. Or maybe Johan Duhaupas versus Price. Actually, Duhaupas would be a good name for Aslanbek Makhmudov too. Also comes down to money too. The BT card, which will house Joyce and Huck, if Huck agrees to terms, which I think is also October the 12th. And Dubois versus 2BA will be interesting to see who they get. A Commonwealth defense. Junior Farr go get that payday for that I guess it depends how much is Frank Warren willing to pay for a defense of that Commonwealth belt. Because I think at the moment, even Dubois alluded to it in a comment, for the likes of Price and Chisora had turned it down. And I don't necessarily think, I think maybe it's a combination of factors, but it could be they didn't want to do it for the risk, but also the reward. If the reward wasn't there and he didn't get his checkbook out and put up the big numbers, I mean, eventually Frank Warren will have to do that, because he will get into this phase where, they're just not going to be able to get anyone good. And we know why Dubois fought Tete, a vacant belt, but they can't drop back down to, what was he, world number 369. They're going to need to get someone who's at least in the top 100 and give him some rounds. He needs to get some credible opponents in front of Dubois, just so he can get some experience, because if he doesn't get some, tests and challenges in the next year or two, he may not have enough experience when it comes to, the crunch down the line. Joseph Peter Parker by now, it definitely sounds suspicious, but why wouldn't it be the case? I don't necessarily think it sounds suspicious. I mean, why would you come up with that? Because it just sounds, so out there. You'd never just sort of say, one, he was sick, and then make it up to be a spider bite. I think it's legit. But, I mean, people will ask, well, where's the evidence? So, Al Dog, thank you for the super chat there. Really appreciate it. So, he says, best heavyweight channel on YouTube. Thank you very much. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for the donation. And thank you to everyone who is here in the chat and coming to the Boxing Squared YouTube channel on a regular basis. I do appreciate it, and, it makes the effort of putting the videos together worthwhile, with people supporting the channel, supporting the videos, hitting that like button, because that also helps as well. So I do thank one and all. Thank you again, L Dog. Parker pulling out proves Chisora is the new boogeyman of the division. With 10 losses on his record. Rightio. Could there be problems behind the scene, Parker versus Chisora, with Chisora making a stink at the presser? No, I don't really think that was part of it. I think Parker was up for it, and if you've seen any clips, or should I say photos on Instagram, he was clearly in shape. There was one with that new Top Rank signing just the other week, him, Jared Anderson and Parker. Parker looked really lean, so he was clearly putting in the work in camp. It wasn't a weight loss camp. He had come into camp in shape, and he was putting in those rounds and really sort of getting into fight shape. So on the face of it, I'm just going to say, look, I believe that he is ill, hasn't been able to train, and 3 or 4 weeks out from a fight, because people have been saying, oh, it was only, it's still 4 weeks away, he can recover. But that totally just gets right down to, interrupting his camp. And if he's unable to, train properly, I mean, that's not going to result in his optimal performance. So Raz says, loving the live streams, bro. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Raz. Thank you for joining the live stream. Angus says, Parker was out of the gym training for a long period of time, but wasn't ready to fight a high risk without a full camp. Well, he was getting a full camp, and he had a camp as well ahead of that fight in June against Alex Leopai. So I don't buy that he was underdone, because he came into that fight against Leopai in pretty good shape. Price gets destroyed versus Dubois and has already turned down the fight, says Adam Fahey. Money might have also been part of that too. Angus Young says he brought a doctor's certificate. I did actually see that there was a mini press release. I saw it the day after. And yeah, they did provide a medical certificate. Obviously with contracts and other bits and pieces, it's probably part of what they had to do. So Toby has joined the chat. He says hi in the chat. Where are we here? Where was Parker bitten by a spider? UK doesn't have real spiders. Well, he was in Las Vegas, so I'm not sure what sort of spiders they've got out there, but I'm sure someone has been looking into that. L-Dog says, I want Hrgovic to fight Chisora. I think Chisora won't take it, though, as we know just how Chisora does against tall opponents with a good jab. Well, I think at 3 weeks' notice, it's probably a disservice to Hrgovic, too. I mean, you'd want him having, if he was to fight Derek Chisora, more than 3 weeks. But also, would Chisora take it? More so because Hrgovic is sort of prospect coming up, and if he gets beaten by someone with less than 10 fights, it's not a good look for Chisora, who'd be well seen as being on the way down. But I guess Chisora's come back from stuff like that before. Remember Ajit Kabayal, who was a prospect when he fought Chisora, handled him pretty easily enough. And at that point in 2017, we were all asking the question: is Chisora done? What's he going to do? But he has had a bit of a renaissance since, obviously the Takam win and the Spilka win. But some of that, you can sort of look at those opponents and go, how much was left in the tank? It was a bit of a war against Takam. That was a really, really good fight. And Takam did gas out, and Chisora took advantage. But I do question now to Carlos Takam what he's going to be doing. I think he's more of an opponent now, and I expect he'll be sort of tossed in at top rank in some sort of in-house fight, maybe against Kabayel, for example. Hunter is not known Povetkin. I think Michael Hunter, does have a growing profile in the heavyweight division. With casuals, I'm not so sure. I mean, I'm not in the UK to sort of judge the interest in Michael Hunter. But, what is Hunter's profile in the UK? Obviously, he's had a few good results on matchroom cards. But is that enough? Alexander Povetkin? Well, Povetkin, I sort of think, at 3 weeks' notice, I mean, he's probably unlikely to take it. He's the sort of guy that wants his 3-month camp leading into it. Kind of like a Kubrat Pulev, who you may recall a couple of years ago wanted a 4-month camp for Anthony Joshua. I'm predicting UFC 243 will be the biggest pay-per-view in New Zealand history. Bigger than the Tour one. I think it was about 85,000, wasn't it? A Tour in Cameron. I'll just get back to a Patreon question. So Scott Lang says, hi Squared, who wins between Wallin and Chisora, with Wallin having a proper camp and full VADA testing for the fight? I think I would pick Chisora. And you can kind of look at that like similar to potentially the Kabayel and Chisora fight. But had Kabayel and Wallin actually fought for that EBU title as was ordered, had it gone through, I was picking Kabayel to win that one. I kind of feel that Wallin was I don't want to say cheaper version, but the sort of less talented version of Ajit Kabayel. So I think I would roll with Chisora that one, probably a late knockout. And Toby says, what did you make of the Spence Porter fight? Also, do you think Crawford will ever get to fight the PBC fighters? So the first question first, that was a really entertaining fight. I really, really enjoyed that one. It was unexpectedly entertaining. I think many of us in our minds are just sort of written off Porter as not being competitive, but that he would get beaten and sort of Spence, his class would sort of shine through and he'd do his thing as the fight sort of progressed, and it sort of didn't turn out that way. And I know Spence has sort of said that he wanted to fight that way and fight Porter's fight, but I'm not so sure that really, I mean, I think Porter imposed himself to the point where Spence had to fight that way. But it was a really good fight. And for me, it was really, really close. And that knockdown, what was the 11th round? I mean, that was the sort of thing that I thought, yeah, this is just Spence just edging ahead here. And I thought those 116, 111 cards were absolutely cruel towards Porter. I didn't expect him to get one judge, 115, 112, but I guess it shows you the closeness of some of these rounds. But I thought the right man won. I just didn't think it was quite that wide. And I had seen some people saying that, Spence was exposed and all that sort of stuff, but at the end of the day, he won the fight, and it was a very entertaining fight. I mean, he is beatable, but but like all boxers are beatable. On their night, they can be beaten. But I thought that was a really good fight. And I think Sean Porter, his credit and his sort of who he is, he's gone up in the estimation of fans. So it was a good night for him, even though it was a loss. And when they brought Danny Garcia into the ring afterwards, I was sort of thinking, that's not really the sort of fight that I want to see for Spence next. And I don't mind the sort of Porter and Spence fight rematch if they do in fact make that. Second part of that question, Will Crawford ever get to fight the PBC fighters? Well, there has been a sort of softening and a changing of that narrative just in recent days, with Sean Porter sort of indicating, yeah, I'd be willing to fight Terence Crawford. It does seem like it's sort of just flipped a little bit on the sort of, you're on the wrong side of the street, because Porter's sort of basically what he was saying was, if the fighters really want the fight, we can kind of make it happen. So, I mean, does that sort of change or expose the previous narrative? I mean, over to you what you believe. But I mean, if Porter was to fight Crawford, I'd really like that fight. It'd give us a good litmus test as well if Porter fought Crawford, and especially if Crawford beat him. It gives us a good comparison. I mean, I know triangle theories, all that sort of stuff don't work out, but at least it's a common opponent to get a gauge for the eventual Crawford and Spence fight, should they both remain undefeated. But yeah, it does sort of seem like Crawford is out on an island on his own over at Top Rank, but he knew that when he re-signed with them just recently. So some of it, you can sort of say, well, he stayed loyal to his promoter that's built him up. But if he wanted that fight, it might have already happened this year if he'd signed a deal over at PBC. But yeah, I mean, that's over to him and his call. So, with most of the talent over at PBC, some of that was his decision to stay where he was. I mean, you can kind of make the same argument for Jamal Charlo. He's the odd man out at 160. He's obviously on an island on his own over at PBC with all the talent over at DAZN, for example. So that's a similar sort of situation. And I don't necessarily think it's not a case of they don't want to fight him, and vice versa with Crawford. I think it really promotional issues, it is key here and king at the moment, with silos, all over the place. Heavyweight division, being one of them. Someone left a comment for who should Chisora fight, and they named 3 PBC fighters, and I was just like, what, 3 weeks notice, and they're going to be helping out and trying to save. Is Al Heyman going to be trying to do Eddie Hearn favors and try to save Eddie Hearn's pay-per-view? I think not. Right Hook Boxing, this is another Patreon question. Which heavyweight prospect do you consider to be on top right now? Well, for me, and I've been consistent about this, for quite a while now, Filip Hrgović is my number 1 prospect. But the sort of 5 or 6, that I have as my top crop: Aslanbek Makhmadov, obviously Filip Hrgović, Tony Yoka, Daniel Dubois. I'm just trying to think. Joyce, but is he really a prospect anymore? There were 6 guys. F.A. Ajagba being the other one. How could I forget him? Right Hook Boxing, another Patreon question. What is the one heavyweight matchup you want the most now? Do you mean in terms of one that's makeable or fantasy matchup? Because that is the issue. Because I think a lot of people always sort of throw out the, let's make F.A. Ajagba and Daniel Dubois, for example. To me, that's never going to get made at this point in their respective careers, just because there's not enough money in it for them to ever get made. There's nothing on the line. But you could argue that'd be one of the best, I think, fights in the heavyweight division today. I mean, there'd be a number of those sorts of matchups. If they could get made, I'd love to see them made, but they won't get made. But in terms of realistic matchups, I mean, once you strip out promotional sort of considerations and broadcasting issues, some of the best fights that we'd want just won't get made. I have to think on that one. But I'll just get back to the chat here. I've probably slipped about 300 comments behind now. Yes, it does appear to be the case that I'm well behind. Okay, I'll just have to creep back in the chat here. So Miroslav says Spence Porter body low blow. Yeah, there was a lot of low blows in there, and I was thinking that Porter didn't really sort of seem to protest as much as he maybe should have, to at least draw the referee's sort of attention to some of those low blows. I mean, there was a couple of warnings, but a number of shots did stray pretty low. Angus says Porter won comfortable. Yeah, I thought it was a close fight, and I thought Spence just edged it, but I didn't see a comfortable win for Porter. But I guess that comes down to who do you, in terms of judging. As we saw with the judges, there was a massive swing. Was it about 8 rounds? what do you value in a fight in terms of judging? What gives someone the round, as opposed to, another judge. Uncle Al ain't going to help Crawford's profile by feeding him anyone from his stable. Yeah, well, that was part of what I was thinking when Porter made those comments. I was like, is Al Heyman really going to allow him to go over? And but some of that depends on, would it be on the PBC in terms of say a Fox card or a Showtime card? Because if it was that sort of circumstance, you could see that. But I'm sure ESPN wouldn't let Crawford fight on one of those other rival networks, and it's not, those sorts of fights are nowhere near big enough to do some sort of simulcast pay-per-view either. Triple G versus Derevyanchenko, the fight will be lit. And actually, I'll go back to one of my final Patreon comments, questions I should say. Someone had asked it, I can't remember where it was. Okay, actually I'll just someone did ask me about that. What did I they must have changed their question, but how did I think that one was going to end or play out? That's a tough one, because I mean, Triple G's a pretty old sort of middleweight right now, and Derevyanchenko, he's dangerous. I guess there is, I mean, I know Triple G sort of made some comments, and it seemed like maybe he's talking up Derevyanchenko's chances of winning. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, is Triple G, he's been in a lot of fights, a lot of training camps. He was a champion for a long time. Is it going to come to a case that he gets old overnight? But then I sort of think about that fight that Derevyanchenko had with, what was it, Jacobs? And I thought Jacobs won that pretty comfortably. Yeah, I think I mean, I haven't really followed the build-up super closely, but I think, some of it comes down to, I mean, also looking at the change of trainer with Banks. He's now in there. He's going to change Triple G's style to some degree. He's not just going to be, Abel Sanchez style plodding forward and, that's going to be it. There is going to be some defensive responsibility, and I think we saw that, shades of that in that first fight with Banks. So L-Dog says, I can't believe some people are ranking Spence top 3 pound for pound. Lomachenko, Crawford, Usyk, Canelo, Inoue are all better in terms of pound for pound. Man, pound for pound list, that's just like a quagmire and a minefield. Adam Fahey says, get them likes up, people. Yes, please. If you're in the chat, please hit that like button. I'll just see if I can whip through these comments here and then get to a couple more topics that I wanted to touch on. I think we've already been going for about 50 minutes, so I'll try to wrap it up to maybe just over an hour, and I'll say that and it'll end up being another 30 minutes, but we'll see. Technically, a low blow is anything below the belly button. I think we certainly saw some of those in that Errol Spence fight. So Miroslav says, dream matchup Wilder versus Usyk, but hoping that Usyk would knock him out by accumulation of punches. Judges won't let Usyk win. I guess actually, if I was to do some, going back to Right Hook Boxing's question earlier, a whole bunch of fights, if they could get made and there was no obstacles, I think it would be piling in some of these prospects against each other. I would like to see Filip Hrgović versus Daniel Dubois right now. I mean, how interesting would that be? I mean, or Aslanbek Makhmudov on the biggest stage against a big puncher. Because at the moment, some of these guys that he's facing just don't have enough pop to trouble him. And we know from some of his amateur career, Makhmudov's got a very good chin, and he took a lot of punishments in some of the fights that he was in, but then he would just sort of absorb it and then come through. So Mala2243 says, Parker has fought fighters better than Chisora, but mentally broken by a journeyman at a shit talk session. Yeah, I can't see it. I think Joseph Parker, he was going to win that fight if it went. I mean, that was my pick. And yeah, I know some people are sort of really on the Derek Chisora sort of hype train at the moment after a couple of performances in the last year against Carlos Takam and more recently against Spilka. But yeah, I just sort of think at 35 and, he's got a lot of miles on the clock. I think, someone like Parker with his skills, his speed and movement was, going to kabeljau him. Ajit Kabayel showed us the blueprint to beat him in 2017. So Thelamus says, anything below my hairline is a low blow. How hard did you laugh at Wilder stating he was Hall of Fame? What more do you think he has to do to get there? I did actually spend about 10 minutes talking about that at the start of the video, so I don't want to completely go over old ground, but I do think if he was to retire tomorrow, say for example injury curtailed the rest of his career, I think it's touch and go, and does he deserve to be in there? But then some of the accolades that he's racking up, but also you have to look who was the Hall let in before, and what was the measuring stick in terms of their, what they were let in for. And you could probably make a case that Wilder could get in there, given some of the other people that are in the Hall of Fame. True 2022, in reality, a punch on your high waistband does nothing to the crown jewels. One of me... Oh, can't read those two words when they feign injury. And we've got UK Rob in the house. He actually had a birthday the other week, 65 I believe, so happy retirement, Rob. L Dog says Wilder is in the pound for pound best boxer of all time. I guess it's that question about not strictly addressing that, but more the heavyweights, obviously in pound for pound lists, very rarely in them, and there is the debate about whether they can be in them or should be in them. Pound for pound lists for me. So Rob is saying lol cheeky bastard, but I believe it was 40, so happy birthday to you, Rob. So Will Magic Man says, what do you think about the comparisons being made between Dubois' jab and that of Holmes? Well, it's still early in Dubois' career, so that's the real upside. At 22 years old, he can keep honing his craft, his jab, and I think we have seen some improvements, since he's turned pro. Certainly in those early fights against some of those guys that were coming to fall down, he didn't really need to use it, and I think we have seen improvement. And there's been guys like Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis, who've been working with him, having sessions with him, and I think we're starting to see the benefit of that, those sessions, the time that's being put into him. And his trainer, Martin Bowers, doesn't really get a lot of credit, I think, publicly, but I think he's been doing a fine job for Daniel Dubois, a guy in guiding him. And a lot of people sort of talking about Dubois stepping up to certain levels, but at 22, I think, the next year or so, 18 months, at what he's doing, the level that he's been at, I think he's been matched well, and he's getting some of the tests and trials that he needs, but might become a little bit harder to secure some of those opponents. But his jab is a very good jab, but in terms of being, exactly like Larry Holmes' jab, it's probably not there yet, but, a few more years, who knows? So L Dog says Wilder is not a Hall of Fame fighter in my opinion. And that's I think it's one of those things, and as I was saying earlier, and you can catch it on archive, it's one of those toss-up sort of situations. You could probably make a case from being in there at the moment, but I don't by any means think that it's a slam dunk or anything. So Rob says, I know there's no rush, but Dubois needs a test soon. Yeah, it'd be good to see him in with some of the tests that he has had, he's actually done a lot better than I think maybe people thought he might. I think the Razvan Kajanu fight was one of those occasions where, people thought, including myself, this is a good test. He'd be able to get some rounds in, because that's some of what he needs now, is rounds. So even though Kevin Johnson, when he fought Dubois, came with no ambition, was super negative, Dubois got so much out of that, not because of the performance, but what he was able to go away and work on, because he did look a little bit one-paced and, lacked variety. And we've seen since that fight him really trying to work on his variety, and his jabs got better, and, his placement of his punches, not just looking for the one right hand to end it all. There has been a lot of work that they've been going, okay, if we can't break someone down and knock them out early on, We've got to actually put in the work to sort of, really pepper the body, body, head, and, it has been a process that I think was quite good. He needs a few more actual similar durable opponents, but someone also that can sort of throw back with some ambition too. That's kind of what he needs now. But when you start breaking it down and what's in the heavyweight division in terms of the gatekeepers and the career journeymen that are durable, I mean, it's not a whole lot running around that you can kind of go, this is the sort of test that he needs. I mean, even someone like a Joey DeWeco would actually be a decent fight for Daniel Dubois if they could secure that. But a guy who's 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", and DeWeco, that's maybe not what they would want in terms of an opponent, just because they want to fight some guys that are a bit taller to, prepare him for, taller fighters. But some of those shorter heavyweights might actually at least fill a gap. I mean, it's hard to say what they'll do with him, but the next year, 18 months, he does need some sterner challenges, but, guys that can test him too. But, you start drawing a list up of what that could look like. It doesn't actually... it's not a big list. And yes, you did miss your Patreon question, True 2022, which I'll just go back to it. Yeah, we talked about that maybe about 25 minutes ago. So I was, I'll just quickly recap. So effectively I was saying I wouldn't mind seeing the cruiserweight limit sort of brought up to say 220 and the heavyweight from, over 220, but wasn't on board with the 265 sort of limit. I sort of thought I'd rather just sort of see one heavyweight division, not like Olympics where it's heavyweight and super heavyweight. I'll just get back to my list of topics that I wanted to touch on. So we've got one sort of fight of some note this weekend. It's actually a little bit quiet on the heavyweight scene. There's a few guys running around, but nothing major. But one fight that, Jermaine Franklin versus Pavel Sauer. So this is on that Clarissa Shields card. And Jermaine Franklin versus Pavel Sauer. It's an okay fight. So Franklin 19-0. Pavel Sauer, he's 11-1, and that one loss was to Filip Hrgović. I think it was the second or third fight. He was taken out in a round. So I think for me, Pavel Sauer is, he's at a certain level, and Jermaine Franklin needs to get in there and basically prove that, he belongs at the next level. At the moment, he's fought the guys like Jerry Forrest in his last fight, for example, Rydell Booker before that, and he wasn't exactly convincing. And that Jerry Forrest fight, I thought Jermaine Franklin, a lot of people, the judging, the cards are pretty wide. You could make a case that Jerry Forrest won that fight, and it's an opportunity on this card for Jermaine Franklin to actually get in there, get the job done, get a knockout, look good, and basically get a bit more buzz behind his name, because I think he hasn't exactly done much to prove that he belongs at where he believes he is. He's saying he's going to be a heavyweight champion, and he's basically the best American heavyweight prospect at the moment, and I think that's certainly very debatable. Jermaine Franklin, wasn't he ranked by an organization? Not at the moment. Farhood says Franklin needs to show us something. Last couple have been lackluster. Yeah, that's exactly what I've been sort of saying. And, he was sort of on people. I mean, in my last video on Franklin from that Jerry Forrest fight, which was a surprisingly good fight, because Forrest had been coming up. He was on, I think, an 18-fight win streak or something crazy like that. But it was all against very low-level opposition. So he came into that with very little buzz. He'd been fighting, not very good opposition. And he was all over Jermaine Franklin, gave him a very good fight. And Franklin couldn't separate himself from Forrest or Rydell Booker. Booker, a 38-year-old who'd been, his career was curtailed by being in prison, all that sort of stuff. I just think Franklin needs to go in there and blast Pavel out. If he goes life and death with Pavel Sauer, then, it's not exactly going to look good for him. So Unger says Pavel Sauer is a statue. From the photos from the press conference and the face-off, Jermaine Franklin didn't look 6'2". That looks to be slightly exaggerated, but Pavel Sauer looked every bit of a 6'5", and he sort of said, look, I'm just going to work and use my attributes as the taller and lengthier man. So that is the way to get the job done. But yeah, I think Franklin has got to get inside, bang away. He said he's going to go to the body, but he needs a knockout. He needs to look good. At the moment, I mean, based on what I've sort of seen, Franklin hasn't really sort of proven he's any better than top 50. Maybe he's got a ceiling of top 30. I don't know. Unger says Serenko starched sour. What, in the pros? It was Philip Herwich. I'll just look that up. Yeah, he hasn't fought Serenko as a pro. Was that in the amateurs, Unger? Definitely was Philip Hergovich, and definitely a first round knockout. So I'm pretty sure that was on one of those WBSS cards from memory. Okay, so another topic that I just briefly wanted to canvass. I mean, Evander Holyfield coming back for an exhibition match. Obviously another older fighter coming back. This is maybe not quite on the same sort of level as Nigel Benn. Obviously he's coming back as a professional to face Saki Obika. Holyfield coming back for an exhibition, I believe in Japan, was it? Seems to be a bit of a theme of this, but I guess, a lot of these guys, I think Holyfield, he was a case where he'd blown through most of his fortune. It's probably going to be pretty easy money. I mean, I wouldn't support it if Holyfield was coming back for a pro fight, but an exhibition, I can let that slide. I think Nigel Benn, that case, yeah, I think that's only going to end in disaster. But also, outside of the curiosity value, does anyone really want to, pay to see a lot of these older guys fighting on, maybe for one fight, but if these guys come back and fight for a few years, I think the interest will wane pretty quickly. And obviously legacies, in terms of putting a dent in their legacies, if they take a lot of punishment and damage and losses, you got to think about that as too. I think a lot of people argue that Roy Jones Jr. shouldn't have gone for nearly as long as he did, and maybe he did do some damage to his legacy. And the final thing on my list to talk about was the WBO president, was it Paco Varcasel, taking shots at the WBO, and Gilberto Mendoza basically sort of saying the number of champions you have is absolute craziness. And 42 champions across 17 divisions. And for me, he's completely preaching to the converted. But I mean, why is another sanctioning body taking pot shots at another sanctioning body? And is the WBO's house really that in order? I mean, some of their rankings and other bits and pieces seem a bit crazy, but 4 heavyweight champions for the WBA. You may recall a few years back, what was it, 2016, I think, at the start of 2016, they tried to start a tournament to rationalise the belts, because I think it was 3 at that point. They wanted to get it down to 1. They were going to run their tournament. Fell over immediately, basically before it even started. But 4 heavyweight champions, 42 champions across 17 weight divisions, I think it was. I mean, absolute madness. So just get back to the chat here. Oh, so Unger says Serenko KO'd in the World Series of Boxing. Yep, doesn't surprise me. Probably was pretty early on too, right? Adam Fahey says, can't believe Tete was in the Commonwealth title fight. Yeah, absolutely. I actually had some madman come to the channel basically saying how dare I say that Tete didn't deserve to be in that fight because he was the champion of Africa. And I was like, well, come on. I mean, he, world number 369 according to BoxRec, hadn't been fighting anyone of note. Just because he holds some sort of, title, which can, in some circumstances, be easy to obtain and, pretty easily. Yeah, I don't think he should have been in there. And how Frank Warren managed to convince the committee to get that Commonwealth title on the line for Tete, he's obviously done an incredible job to convince them that there was a viable fight that should be up for the belt. So you got to congratulate Frank Warren for doing what he did for his fight. A pretty soft touch, keeps him busy, gets a vacant title. They follow through on that whole every belt situation. So Basic Kid says, do you think Chisora will be able to get up for the fight if it isn't Parker? Well, I think if it's a good opponent, sure. But I was talking about it earlier. I mean, they really got to put some effort in to get a decent opponent, because the pay-per-view and, you know, how much money they're going to make from it completely rides on this, because no one wants to see Derek Chisora in with a journeyman, because that doesn't help sales. And the whole thing with, you know, if you get someone who doesn't have a profile and they've got a whole bunch of losses on the record, doesn't help the event at all, I don't. I liked it when you get guys like Deontay Wilder at 210 fighting Dustin the Work Nichols at 500 pounds. What happened to the super heavyweight division? How do you mean? I mean, it's certainly at the Olympics they have the delineation between heavy and super heavyweight. Timothy Thomas says, good morning Boxing Squared, what's up people? Watch Spence Porter fight ×3. Cannot see how Spence won. Porter 7 rounds, 2 draw, 3 lost. KD 10-9, not 10-8, as Porter was ahead at that point. Well, watching it live, I thought that that was a very close decision to Spence, and I wasn't mad at the decision. Adam Fahey says, I'm just happy this weekend to see Madrimov, Triple G and Ennis this weekend. Yeah, there's a few decent fights rolling around. It kind of feels like some of the hype for some of them though, and maybe this is just the changing nature of boxing. More events, more promoters, more shows. Kind of, maybe it's one of those things where it's just this sort of, things feel like they're spread thinner these days, and this sort of promotion into certain events doesn't have that big fight feel as maybe some of these fights would have in the past. I don't know, is that just me? The WBA has way too many champions, says L-Dog. Yep, preaching to the converted there. It's ridiculous. I mean, why do they have to make these up? And what's the deal with Manuel Charr? I mean, 2 years, no defences. He's going on like he's a heavyweight champion and, you know, basically king of the tree sort of thing. But it's ridiculous that he's not fighting. Fat apples, too many weight divisions and too many belts anyway. I would have merged 115 and 118 and scrapped 122 and 154. Yeah, I wouldn't be mad at some of that. I mean, some of those lower weights, 3 pounds, I mean, I think you probably could actually just, you know, merge them. Belt amalgamation is what's needed. Yeah, I mean, they should have been, WBA should have ordered a tournament for, you know, Joyce, Bryan and Charr. And they should have said, look, you've got 6 months to sort this down to 1. All these things just drift. And now we're hearing that maybe Manuel Charr won't be fighting Trevor Bryan in early November. I mean, that just pushes Charr's reign out to, you know, over 2 years and 0 defences. Do you think Kuzman could face Joe Joyce in a rematch? Well, he's tied up with Matchroom through through a co-promotional deal with his outfit, World of Boxing. So at this point, no. Maybe that would be something that Joyce and his team would be interested in at some point if Kuzman was free, because obviously with Joyce being knocked out by Kuzman in the amateurs, I think that you could build a little bit of a narrative around that. And Kuzman is a very solid fighter. Didn't look great in that style matchup with Michael Hunter, but against Joyce, that might be more his sort of cup of tea. Not saying that he would win, but I think that would be a decent fight, and I wouldn't mind that. Fat Apple says Tete was mentally beaten before he got to the ring. You could tell he didn't want to be there. Well, it was really weird because he was 1 minute he was really up, and the next he looked like he just sort of crapped his pants. True 2022 says, of course it's a circus silly. So Avery says, I'm here in Greenville, South Carolina. I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning to listen to you. It was worth it. Well, thank you for getting up, Avery. And I was saying at the start of the stream that I might have caught a few people out with the timing, because I start my stream on Friday at 9:30 p.m. at New Zealand Standard Time, but last week daylight savings changed, so our clocks moved by an hour, so that might have caught some people out. So yeah, apologies if you were one who was caught out by an hour. So obviously now the clocks won't change for, I think it's another 6 months or so. Timothy Thomas says Tete was dead weight, dug up from the grave. I have to question his age. He did look about 40. Fat Apple says WBC egg mayo belt. Well, there does seem to be too many trinkets rolling around right now. What's the under-over on headbutts for the Holyfield fight? Unga says, get rid of all the junior and superweight weight classes. Yeah, I wouldn't mind, if it was rationalised. I mean, what do they need? I mean, if you took it down from 17 to something like 10, some of those lower ones you could totally rationalise and cut out, easily 3 or 4 of the lower weights. In all honesty, how did the WBO gold belt come about? I know Joyce owns it, but why was it made? It's a good question. It was just all of a sudden put on the line. Timothy Thomas, Edge Boxing Online, watch it again with the sound off. I beg you just once more. Okay, that must be a Spence Porter one. L-Dog says, middleweight to cruiserweight is a huge jump. Salty Sally, Trevor Bryan in good position if he can pick up that regular title. The guy has no following. Well, that's partly because he's been fighting nobodies and hasn't been fighting, in over a year now. What is Junior Farr's next steps? A good question. I actually saw that his dad had died, so commiserations out to Junior Farr and his family. He was meant to be being involved in a fight or two, reportedly, towards the back end of this year, but we'll have to see where he goes. It's sort of a sad when a parent dies, so my heart goes out to Junior Farr and his family. Timothy Thomas, Adam, if someone from the WBA has shares in belt making factory, yeah, that sounds pretty much right. Right Hook Boxing says, we appreciate the streams, mate, and the channel. You cover the heavyweights better than anyone. Well, thank you, Right Hook Boxing. And if you don't follow Right Hook Boxing and aren't subscribed to him on YouTube, please do so. Great channel. Jason Landis says the EU countries are ditching the 6-month clock change nonsense. Man, it knocks the system around the sort of change. It's not so bad this one. It's the one in about 6 months' time. Always feel like it takes me a few weeks to adjust. I forgot about Farr. He's disappeared off the radar, almost as bad as Tyson Dong. Didn't Tyson Dong go to wrestling? And and then didn't he go to something else like martial arts or something? Who do I think that Hrgović should face next? Well, I think he needs to be more active. I've been a little disappointed with, as I mentioned, I think in a stream from the other week, that he hasn't been as active as he should have been, but that's not his fault. He's now with a bigger promoter that's got a big heavyweight stable, Matchroom. He's co-promoted by Sal and Matchroom. There's no excuses why they can't be matching some of these guys against each other. They should be. Hrgović versus Chisora or Charles Martin are the fights I want to see. Not sure the Charles Martin one will just happen, because I think what's going to happen now for Charles Martin, because they're kind of doing all these in-house fights. We've seen Adam Kovnatsky, Gerald Washington, and a few others all sort of fighting off against each other, including Charles Martin versus Kovnatsky. I think what you may see is potentially Charles Martin versus Gerald Washington next. Boxing Squared, why have you stopped saying buckle up? Sound of your seatbelt being fastened. Well, I never said it in every video. It was just some videos where I sort of said it. I don't know, it's kind of, I guess over time sometimes you just, sayings and other bits and pieces drop out of what you're saying. I mean, one thing I used to say in quite a few of my videos was, after someone had said something, I'd say, so let's unpack that. And I've noticed I don't really sort of say that anymore. Yeah, I don't know. I'll try to drop it in at some point, just for you, Will Magic Man. Fat Apples, this is good content. Defo watch again if I can catch you. Well, thank you, Fat Apples. Timothy Thomas says, BS, I was asked before, have you ever laced up in your youth? Yeah, I did. I was talking about this in the stream a week ago, so you can go catch that one on that stream. But yes, I did train for just over a year when I was 16, 17. Blue Collar Sports TV, Hrgović is fighting on the Saudi bill, isn't he? Well, I did hear Eddie Hearn in one of his interviews, various interviews, saying that he might be on the Monaco card too. So I don't know. We'll have to see what's going to happen there. But he needs some better, more regular fights at this point. He's been fighting like he's a 15 and 16 year sort of fringe contender in terms of the gaps of fights this year, rather than a guy who needs a bit of work. I think they need to, really focus on, and there was no reported injuries as I know it, so I think Hrgović needs to be a bit more active. Hopefully they can get him into some fights. Thank you to L Dog for subbing to Right Hook Boxing. Timothy Squared, Timothy Squared is still in his youth. I guess it depends what you consider as youth. I'm rapidly approaching 40, a few years off that still, but yeah, I definitely don't feel as spry as I once did. True 2022, physically impossible to make new start time. Shame, but you'll try to catch up later. Yeah, sorry about that, True. Yeah, that would have caught a few people out. But yeah, daylight savings changed the end of September here, and yeah, all of a sudden, it only sort of occurred to me as I was about to hit go for the stream. DJ DQ, big up Boxing Squared, and big up to you too. BS, have you watched BFV channel? Spence on the lash post-fight. Spirits can't be good for blood straight after a very hard fight. I saw him and Sean Porter get into it in the post-fight, but do you mean in terms of he was having some booze after the event? I mean, really over to him what he does with his time and how he wants to sort of treat his body. I mean, obviously there has been some talk over, his career that maybe he hasn't been as dedicated in between fights, but having a little bit of a celebration, I'm not too mad at that. Ultimately, over to him what he does. Maybe Martin Brazil. Well, they're going to get Brazil back into the mix at some point. I did see Dominic Brazil from his Instagram the other day training, so they're going to have to recycle him somehow. Maybe Martin Brazil. Maybe they'll look to have like Brazil versus Kaufman or something like that, a bit slightly lower level for Brazil to come back in, and actually that one would be a bit of a war actually. So Scott70 says check out Bacoli's latest post on Instagram, bizarre. Okay, I will go check that out after the stream. Do I know what's going on with Josh Kelly? Can't say that I do. B sample location is in the stash in Argos car park. You might have to ask Takeshi 69 about that one. Late 30s, you're still a baby. Don't feel like that anymore, but thank you for saying so. I would like to see DAZN put on a more low-level shows and feel some of the time. I mean, I thought some of the shows DAZN has put on have been pretty low-level. Your thoughts on even rounds 10-10? Often the A-side is getting the close rounds without any real reason for that happening. Yeah, it is a tough one as well, and some of it goes to how you score, but often, I find I've got a round where I'm just like, man, that's too tight to call, and I have to look at who did I give it to? And then, I see someone else's scorecard, I'm like, oh, okay, they gave it to that guy. But then sometimes you see clear rounds, you're like, yeah, that must be a round for X fighter, and you see someone else's card and it's for the other guy. Yeah, judging so subjective. I mean, it's one of the good things about boxing, but also one of the bad things. Even CompuBox, I saw something the other day. It was a slow-mo of a Canelo fight with a whole bunch of punches that were sort of blocked on, I think it was Triple G's arm or shoulder or something like that, and Canelo was being awarded the punch. So Spence was hard on the drink straight after the fight. Drunken footage with Tank D throwing money at model stripper dancer. Good for him. Baster Kid says, don't be surprised if Brazil has one win and then ends up mandatory challenger for a title again. Oh, well, I hope not. You never know. I mean, if they're going to make Adam Kovnatski wait, maybe they'll make Kovnatski Brazil, because they've actually really tried to have Kovnatski have some of these common opponents to Deontay Wilder, obviously looking to have him in reserve for Wilder if and when required. I mean, you've got 3 or 4 guys that Kovnatski has fought now. Is it Washington, Areola? I know I'm forgetting 1 or 2 others. But yeah, they're trying to make those comparisons. L-Dog says, I'm sick of hearing a knockdown is an instant 10-8. It's not a 10-8 unless the guy actually wins the entire round. It's a good punch though. Very good punch. Your thoughts on the Central Asian dominance in the amateur championship? They're obviously investing in boxing. They've got good programs, and I think you've seen when a country wants to really put time and effort into a certain sport and build up a good program, the results, they don't come immediately, but 5, 10 years down the line. So the makings of the Central Asian countries sort of coming up in the amateur ranks and being more dominant, that's 10, maybe 20 years in the making. The Berman-Stavern 2 route. Well, I'm not sure the WBC could get away with letting Brazil have almost 2 years out of the ring, having one fight and then making him mandatory. I don't think people would stand for it. The great and mighty Al Heyman has finally made Triple G stop ducking Derevyanchenko. All praise to Al. It's a good fight. I like the fight, and I'm interested to see what Triple G's got left. And it's one of the things about running a heavyweight channel, and especially for a quieter weekend. Sure, I'll still do 1 or 2 videos on different bits and pieces, and there's one fight I'll be covering this weekend, the Franklin and Sauer fight. But I get to actually be a fan and watch the fights with everyone else, and I don't have to worry about a post-fight review. I don't have to follow things too closely. I just enjoy the fight. Click on, click off, done. Nigel Brennan will show some of these kids some OG savagery, and they'll be glad it's a one-off. I'm worried that he's going to get hurt. I really am. David Naika keeps failing to achieve at the world level. Disappointing. Yeah, I mean, it might be one of those things that he will be able to, and if you don't know him, he's a New Zealand boxer. He's sort of dipped out at the at the championship, world championships recently. He was big things were expected, potential that he could go for a medal, potentially even gold. He's won a couple of, I think it's Commonwealth Games gold medals, I believe it is. But he sort of dipped out. What was it, at the quarterfinal stage, something like that. I mean, his and Duco was sniffing around for a while. The Joseph Parker's, former promoters and now managers. I mean, they wanted to sign him to a pro, but he wants to go to the Tokyo Olympics. But I think the only opportunity is one more left in early 2020 for him to maybe qualify. Anyway, I'll look to wrap up in the next 3 minutes or so. I didn't realize it was up to an hour and 26. This is what I say. I think I said at 52 minutes. I'll try to only go for another 10, 15 minutes, and all of a sudden 40 minutes goes by. So Timothy Thomas says, reality's voice. Okay, I'm just running through people's different conversations here. Victor Ortiz. I mean, you mean Luis Ortiz? Jeez, I just scratched my leg and it started bleeding. I must have had a little sore or something there. Okay, what do you think of Tony Yoka, world level gatekeeper or champ? I'm quite high on Yoka. I actually really like what I see from him, but he really is going to have to try to utilize his height and his reach, which doesn't always do in his fights. I thought that Wallish, being a much smaller guy, was still managing to get to Yoka relatively easily. But I do think that Yoka, if he can, it depends on his contract too, because he's signed to this whole Canal deal in France, and he's talked about wanting to be a French heavyweight champion, yada yada yada, etc., and fight in France and win it there. But eventually he's going to have to fight overseas. There's no two ways about it. But I do like his chances in the next sort of 2 or 3 years. He'll be one of these guys like these other half a dozen prospects I was talking about earlier who'd be fighting for titles. That next wave is just on the verge of coming through. Sort of this generation, sort of maybe a couple more years, there's a transition coming. And I think some of that is it seems to be Olympic cycles now. So some of these guys, there's a big class of 2016 that by about 2022, 2023 are really going to be in the thick of it. So Unga says spider bite. Scott says spider bite. Possibly, yeah. My leg looks like it's been massacred now. I sort of scratched it and then felt something dripping down my leg. Yeah, I don't know what it was. I have to call Joseph Parker and ask what his story was. I thought Joyce outscored Yoka in the final. Yeah, I did too. I thought that Yoka was very lucky to get that win. Okay, we're up to 1 hour 29 and 17 seconds. I think I'm going to sort of pull stumps there. We'll call time. It's the end of the round, but thank you for joining me here for another Boxing Squared weekly live stream. So it's 9:30 New Zealand Standard Time, which I think if you're in the UK, that's about 9:30 in the morning your time. It'll be starting. In Australia, it's 2 to 4 hours depending on where you are, and it's very, very early if you're in America or Canada. And elsewhere, I thank you for watching. Everyone who's come to the channel, supporting the live stream, thank you so much. So I'll wrap it up there. So Timothy says do some overtime. Feels like I've been doing some overtime. I've got to take a swig of water. My throat is starting to get pretty hoarse at the moment. But yeah, I'll be back same time next week. All the best over the weekend for whatever you're doing, wherever you are, and we'll catch you later. Thank you very much.